Yes, Putin, happy to be here. Stayed with healthcare for more than 2 decades. Worked for Siemens, Cerner, Oracle, few private equity companies, as well as Azra AI as CTO. Now I have my own company, Pyramids, and helping multiple healthcare companies on technology and strategy, including AI. When you start early on, in a startup company, compliance can be a bit reactive, right? Because initially it's more checking the boxes to close the deals and things like that. But then when you scale, it becomes more and more important that it becomes systemic. And some of the challenges I've seen is that as the applications get more usage, the data growth is going to be exponential. And you have to manage that without losing the visibility and control. The consistency across environments, right? The new clients come in, new regions might come in, the workflows might come in. So consistency is key there. Then when you grow, right, when you grow your application and when you are rolling it out to multiple hospitals, identity and access control becomes more and more important. Then one thing that happened is audit fatigue, right? Responding to all these HIPAA audits or high trust audits, SOC 2 audits. Some of these things becomes a little bit taxing for the organization. Then the operational drift, you need to be very careful about the operational drift, that security posture and all those things that start degrade over time. So these are some of the things. So while you're scaling, you need to make sure that while you are building more features and collecting more data into the application, you don't degrade your compliance framework. When you are working with pathology, radiology, imaging data, there's a lot of text and images coming in to you, right? And at Asra, we were more dealing with text and NLP. And sometimes when you get the images, you need to convert it into more kind of the structured reports, right? There were tools for doing that. So once you get this, you need to make sure that these files are protected, right? It is stored in the right place. It's accessible, but it's protected. And also, you're not protecting just the files, it's the clinical decisions, it's the patient outcomes, institutional trust. This is what we are protecting eventually, right? So data classification becomes foundational. All data is not equal. Sometimes there is more valuable data which does not have PHI, which is easier to be protected. When there is PHI and PII, it's even more critical. Then end-to-end data lineage matters, right? We call it data provenance because where the data came from, how it was processed, where it is stored, and that is very essential. Also, security must follow the data, not just the infrastructure, right? So that is why encryption at rest is important, right? So those things are very important. And also even downstream consumer, you need to look at how this data is going to be used. Is it data is going to be used for analytics? Is it going to be used for more AI models? Is it going to be used for dashboards? So the raw data needs to be protection, as well as the data that you're processing needs to be protected as well. So you need to have the right compliance in place to protect all this data as we grow, as we deal with the sensitive data from pathology, radiology, images, and things like that. The risk of getting things wrong, right? So if you look at the loss of customer trust or the reputation of the company, that is key. You cannot lose your trust. Once you lose trust in healthcare, you cannot get it back. So the reputation of your company or reputation of your health system is very important. That is the biggest risk you need to take care. Then the other things that come into picture is regulatory exposure, right? You don't want to get a letter from OCR or you don't want them to investigate your company. Then deal friction. If you don't have the right infrastructure or if you don't manage risk properly, you cannot get into a new deal or it'll take you longer to get into a new deal. So I've been, when I was a CTO, I had to answer like, hundreds of questions from this healthcare organization before they even consider you as a vendor. And once they even consider you as a vendor, you'll have to like have a lot of interviews with them on how you're protecting data, what's your risk management, what's your incident response policy, and things like that. On top of that, there's also monetary things, right? Investor risk. A lot of healthcare companies or startup companies are relying on venture capital companies to come and invest for the next round of capital. So if you don't provide, they have great due diligence, trust me, because they come in with a team to do the due diligence and they ask all sorts of questions and you need to answer that. Not just answer, you need to show the proof of what you're doing it. And then operational paralysis, right? Once you do this, and if you don't operationalize it and don't automate it, it becomes a big problem, right? So these are the risks that you need to prioritize, and we're building this thing for the long term credibility, not just for the short term speed. So you have to achieve speed at the same time. Long term credibility is the most important, and all these risks have to be addressed well before it can happen. I did that evaluation myself, right? I looked at multiple companies who could provide, and there are a lot of companies with generic cloud knowledge and generic security knowledge. For me, that was not just enough. In healthcare, you need to have the deep healthcare specific expertise. You need to understand how the hospital systems or the health systems operate. You need to understand what kind of questions, what is in their top of their mind with their CEOs and with their IT. And regulatory fluency, right? It is not just understanding HIPAA, understanding high trust, or just having certifications is base, but not just that. That you need to go beyond that, understanding the fluency. What does it take to achieve a SOC 2 certification, and how do you maintain that for the long run, right? Then the operational maturity of that company, real world experience, right? If somebody comes and tells me that, yeah, I can do everything, that's a red flag, right? What is your specialty? Why should I pick you, right? Those kind of things are very important. And scalability for approach. When you are a startup company, you're not going to stay as a startup company forever. Startup company might be venture capital funded. It can evolve into a private equity owned company, right? So when you move from a startup company to a private equity owned company to a public company, for example, you need to scale that. So you need a partner who can scale along with you from a cost perspective, from a scalability, from a cloud perspective as well. And alignment with all these growth goals is very important for me. And ultimately, it's a deciding factor. Scaling security requires intentional architecture. You cannot do this as an afterthought. You need to build this into the architecture. And for that, you need a strong environment of isolation with standardized templates, right? So whether it's multi-tenant or single tenants, it's easier, but then scalability becomes a problem with single tenant. So if you're looking at a multi-tenant architecture, you need to make sure that you still have a segmented architecture. You need to have security built in from the beginning, whether it's role-based security or database security. There's multiple ways to segment the data within the architecture. So that is the key. Then, when it comes to rolling out the systems, the configuration can create problems at times. So, infrastructure as code is important because you need to roll this out in a more predictable way, more deterministic way. For that, you need automation. You cannot just have somebody sitting and doing the configuration during the rollout. All these things to be automated, and automating all the security controls like logging, encryption, access policies, monitoring, all these things. That's why, when I was working on the startups, I like the compliance score. I used to strive for 97% or more compliance score. If it goes down, I have to talk to my IT and operational stuff. Hey, why is it going down? What feature did we introduce that is impacting? Those kind of things. And then centralized visibility, a single pane of glass where you can see everything and your workload, your scalability, your horizontal, vertical scalability, everything is. So automation is key. You having the right policies in place and then automate it so that it's repeatable. You don't have to worry about it on a day-to-day basis. We looked at that and said, okay, we could do it ourselves, of course, right? But then we are not the experts. So what I see is that a specialized partner can play as a force multiplier role, because if you have an electrical problem in your house, you call the electrician to come and do it, right? You could do a handyman to do it, but then you cannot trust that fully. So if you have a specialized electrician, that electrician will come and do, and you can be rest assured that it's the right thing to do. Like that, I believe in the specialized partners because translating the regulatory language into practical controls, right? Practical technical controls, it's very important. And providing continuous monitoring is key. And you need to have these tools, right? We could build the tools, we could buy the tools, but then you are selecting a partner. That partner comes with the right tools and right methodology to do it. Then supporting audit readiness. You never know when the audit can happen. That audit, it's not just from the regulatory agencies, because when we sign a contract with the hospital systems, we say that you can come in and audit, give us this much notice, then you can audit. And sometimes there's without much notice, they can come and audit. So audit readiness is key, and helping the teams aligned with regulations, right trainings, right trust, and architecture reviews. These partners come in and review whenever we make an architecture change or a big change in the design. We invite these partners to do the right architectural review and acting as a trusted set of eyes for whatever we do from a compliance and regulatory perspective, so that our team can focus on building the new features for the client and leave this to the right partner to deal with. When you are doing this, you need to have a multi-cloud strategy, right? So multi-cloud strategy does not mean that you have to be in all the cloud. You have to be in GCP, AWS, and Azure. So you need to be capable of multi-cloud strategy, because you never know what features or what services will become available in other clouds that might be even better. So you might want to use that, but try to have a primary cloud, right? Whether it AWS or Azure or GCP, pick your primary cloud, but be vendor agnostic, right? Don't tie yourself too much with the cloud so that you cannot move, because it's a risk, right? The cost goes up, or for some reason we have to move to a different cloud. So a multi-cloud strategy where you are able to use services from multiple clouds, but have a primary vendor, no vendor locking. And sometimes this hospital comes back and say that, okay, you are in AWS, our systems are mostly in Azure. Can you move to Azure? You should be able to say yes. It might take a little bit time to test it out and things like that. That having that cloud strategy, a vendor agnostic, a primary cloud with a multi cloud strategy will help you in the long run from a cost and performance, scalability, as well as the features perspective. A strong cloud governance is very quiet when it's working very well, right? So that's what you want. A clear ownership and accountability in who is doing what, whether you are operational team, your cloud team, there's a development team and a partner. So you need to have clear accountability and ownership and guardrails and guidelines to achieve that, right? Then the automated policy enforcement. You cannot just have somebody sitting there and enforce these policies. You need to have regular checks and make sure that these policies are enforced automatically. And predictable deployment patterns is also very important. That's why I said about infrastructure as code. So predictable deployment patterns, consistent logging, monitoring, and reporting. So, the biggest thing I would say is that operational predictability. So, if you do all these things, you can have an operational predictability and then you don't have to deal with it. That's why I started with it needs to be quiet, right? We don't want firefighting. If everything is done well, it should be quiet, and that's what we want without having issues to deal with.